She organized her entire 5th grade class to sign a petition against Stop and Frisk. So
That's fantastic, man.
every single 5th grader at PS10 in Brooklyn. Yep. Awesome.
We're looking at the future.
Yeah. And a lot of my friends, a few of my friends have been stopped and frisked, and they're no older than 12, and it's really wrong. Yeah.
And what do they tell you about those experiences?
They say it's very scary, and that a lot of the times it's like they don't understand why, because they're innocent. They're just either hanging out with their friends, or they're just simply just sitting on their stoop. And it's really, they say that they finally now realize, after my dad came in and talked to the class, they finally realized, wow, this is actually a really big problem that they did that to me. So.
I was in her class talking to them about journalism, because I report from Yemen and Somalia and Afghanistan, and they've been studying the civil rights movement, and I brought it up, and I just said to them, no one ever is going to knock on your door and say, this is one of the premier issues of your day. You have to realize it yourself. And for this generation of young people, especially in the city of New York, this is going to be one of the premier civil rights issues, because it's being a young black man or a young Latino woman hanging out with your friends is now becoming a crime in the city, and it's young people opposing it. That's the only hope there is of changing it, is if young people realize it as a premier issue of their time. So it's so important for young kids to be mobilized. It's important for young white kids too to realize that what affects their friends who aren't white ultimately comes back and hits them too, and that's why it's so important to have all these kids doing the resistance.
So I want to, because you travel around the Middle East and travel around the world and address human rights issues on a global scale, what do you think about stop and frisk and the concept of collective punishment?
Well, if you look at the most repressive nations in the world, one of the staples of their repressive apparatus is collectively criminalizing huge groups of people. We see it with the Israeli treatment of the Palestinians. You see it with various dissident groups in China. And right here in the United States, we somehow think that we're immune to characterizations that are normally applied to repressive regimes. If you're a young black man or a young Latino man in the city of New York, you are facing down against a repressive regime that has collectively targeted your people. And I think, as from the perspective of a reporter that does international human rights work, when you come back to the city that you live in and you see it, you have to apply the same lens to it. And in not doing that, it's part of this bogus American exceptionalism. America is not the exception when it comes to regimes around the world and the way that you treat your people. America, especially in its treatment of black people in this country from day one, has collectively targeted and punished African Americans. And in the city of New York today, that's exactly what Stop and Frisk is. It's collectively criminalizing a whole group of people based on the color of their skin or their age. We may think that saggy pants and crooked hats look silly. We're older. I'm getting gray like you, Jazz. But dressing in a way that older folks think is silly is not a crime. And we need to decriminalize existence for so many of these young people that are being targeted by this city. But it has a direct connection to these wars abroad. This is a war at home, and until we realize it as such, we're not going to be able to fight it. You have to understand what you're fighting in order to fight it.
So what do you see in terms of, it's interesting that you raised that question, because people tend to disconnect what's happening domestically from what's happening globally, right? And looking back at the civil rights struggle, I would personally say that the reason for the successes that they did gain was the need to shut down domestic turmoil here and the threat to the establishment here on the domestic scene, because without peace here, they could not continue to project their image globally.
Well, remember Malcolm X talked about taking the United States to the United Nations over the treatment of black people in America, and it was laughed at and scorned and dismissed as not on par with the human rights abuses we were seeing around the world, saying it didn't belong at the United Nations. And yet the United States constantly is trying to bring up Chinese human rights abuses, constantly criticizing others around the world, and those are real issues. But when it comes to recognizing the crimes of our own state against our own people. We somehow think it doesn't belong in the international realm of conversation or debate. And so, I mean, I think that also what we're seeing is a militarization of the police in this country. And it's a direct result also of the wars that are being fought abroad. You know, the policies of collective detention in Iraq can be seen on the streets of New York. There's a militarization of the police, a paramilitarization of the police. The assumption, the dehumanization of the enemy is what soldiers are taught. The police are taught to dehumanize people every day in the city on the basis of the color of their skin. As a young reporter, I covered the Amadou Diallo shooting. And you saw that. Those officers made a decision that young man's wallet was a gun that day because they had been taught to dehumanize young black men in this city. And so there's a direct connection between what the U.S. does abroad and what it does at home. And until we, all of us, regardless of our race, see it through that lens, then this is only going to be an issue that young black men perceive as affecting them. It's white people need to come and stand in solidarity and say, we don't accept this in this city either. You know, that's the point. This isn't just a problem for young black men in this city. And until white people wake up and realize that, then it's going to be left as a sidebar issue, which it shouldn't be. It should be one of the premier civil rights issues in this city today.
I think it's the premier human rights issue
and it's very much a human rights
on the
issue.
planet.
Absolutely.